Jax's revenge domain. I knew I was invisible the moment Wade Griffin raised his champagne glass at our annual holiday party and toasted another year of operational excellence without even glancing in my direction. That operational excellence was me pulling 14-hour days, weekend crisis calls during my daughter's graduation, emergency vendor negotiations while sitting in a doctor's waiting room. The company might have had Sterling Manufacturing stamped on the building, but the efficiency running through those production lines was built on 22 years of my sweat and expertise. My name is Spencer Walsh. I'm 48 years old, and I've been keeping manufacturing operations running smoothly since most of these young hotshots were still in high school. I was the guy who turned around failing supply chains, the one who could negotiate with stubborn vendors at 3 a.m. when shipments went sideways. Nobody noticed when I prevented disasters. But when things went wrong, guess whose desk the blame landed on while everyone else pointed fingers from a safe distance? Wade thrived on that imbalance. He was 38 years old with an MBA from some prestigious school and connections that got him promoted faster than his competence deserved. The kind of guy who called every meeting critical but spent the first 10 minutes talking about his weekend golf game with the board members. He didn't need to yell or throw tantrums. He just leaned back in his leather chair, raised an eyebrow, and asked pointed questions like, "So why didn't you anticipate this supply shortage?" in front of a dozen people. Subtle enough that HR couldn't call it harassment, sharp enough that you felt the sting for the rest of the week. One time during my annual review, he joked that if I ever left, the whole operation would stumble for maybe a week before they brought in some fresh talent to modernize things. Everyone laughed because what else do you do when the guy who controls your paycheck is taking shots at your experience? I smiled too, but I filed that little comment away with all the others he'd made over the past 2 years since his promotion. Wade had a habit of sitting in on operational planning meetings just long enough to misunderstand what we were discussing, then leaving halfway through to take calls from his golf buddies. But when a project succeeded, there he was in the company newsletter, standing next to charts full of my data and process improvements. He'd pat my shoulder afterward and say, "Great teamwork, Spencer. This is why experience matters." Like he was doing me a favor by acknowledging my existence. The real problem was how he managed people like chess pieces on his personal board. He didn't care if you liked him. He just wanted you to remember who controlled the game. I watched him quietly freeze out a 20-year veteran in procurement by rerouting all her supplier relationships to younger staff until she took early retirement. Then he acted surprised when she left, as if she'd just abandoned the company, for no reason. For me, it was a slow burn. I never raised my voice or stormed out of meetings. I just did my job so well that he had no choice but to keep me around, until the day I realized I had something in my back pocket that could flip his whole power structure upside down. But that would come later. For now, my life was a cycle of crisis management, quiet fixes, and watching him take credit for innovations he couldn't explain if you spotted him the opening sentence. I stopped attending company happy hours. Too many casual comments had a way of getting back to Wade, twisted into ammunition for his next performance review conversation. I sat at the far end of conference tables, notepad open, eyes focused on the work. I was the reliable one, the steady hand, the guy department heads called when their supply chains hit unexpected snags. And every time I solved a problem that could have cost Sterling Manufacturing millions in downtime, I'd look over at Wade and see that satisfied smirk. The smirk that said he'd found another way to turn my competence into his success story. I didn't mind, or at least that's what I told myself. Because while he was busy playing corporate politics and networking with executives, I was quietly developing something that had nothing to do with his approval, his smirk, or his little power games. The truth was, he didn't even know what game I was actually playing, and by the time he figured it out, he'd already moved his king into checkmate position without realizing it. It happened on a Tuesday, because of course it did. Tuesdays are when bad news feels both inevitable and poorly timed. I'd just finished resolving a logistics nightmare that had threatened to shut down our main production line when Wade's assistant appeared at my desk, tapping her tablet like she was confirming a dental appointment. "Wade wants to see you in his office. HR will be there." That combination, Wade plus HR, wasn't a meeting, it was an execution. His corner office overlooked the entire production floor through floor-to-ceiling windows. Walking toward it felt like crossing a stage while the whole factory pretended not to watch. I kept my pace steady, my expression neutral. I'd been through enough corporate restructuring to know how this worked. Wade was leaning back in his chair when I walked in, one ankle resting casually on his knee like he was about to discuss weekend plans. Beside him sat a woman from HR with a folder on her lap, wearing the kind of professional smile people use when they've already decided your fate. "Let's cut to the chase," Wade said, his voice smooth like he was closing a routine business deal. "We're restructuring the operations department. Unfortunately, that means we're going to have to let you go." He paused, letting the words settle like dust after an explosion. The HR woman slid the termination packet across his desk as if she were serving an expensive meal. "Effective immediately," she added like it was a detail that might have slipped my mind. Then came Wade's flourish. His lips curved into that familiar smirk and he said, "You can clean out your desk when security clears you. We've got some younger talent coming in who understand modern operational strategies." The way he said it, like my 22 years of experience was suddenly obsolete inventory, was pure Wade. I didn't give him the satisfaction of a reaction. I nodded once, tucked the folder under my arm, and stood up. "All right," I said, my voice even. "I'll get out of your way." Walking back to my desk was like walking through a museum of my own career. Eyes flicked up from computer screens, conversations quieted to whispers. Co-workers who'd relied on my expertise for years suddenly found their keyboards fascinating. In offices like ours, showing sympathy to someone on their way out was like painting a target on your own back. I unlocked my laptop, slid it into its case, and placed my security badge on top of my desk. Calendar. The sound of the zipper closing seemed louder than it should have, like the final click of a lock engaging. Inside, though, I wasn't hollow or panicked, like Wade probably expected. I wasn't mentally rehearsing unemployment conversations or wondering how I'd explain this to my wife. I was thinking about the file folder in my home office, thick with patent documentation, attorney notes, and the certificate with my name printed in official black ink. The one thing that could pull the foundation out from under Sterling Manufacturing faster than Wade could come up with another condescending remark about fresh talent. As I walked through the lobby with my bag over my shoulder, I caught my reflection in the glass doors. I looked calm, maybe too calm. Wade thought this was the final scene, that my story ended in his office with an insult disguised as corporate strategy. But the truth was, this wasn't an ending. It was just the opening move in a game he didn't even know we were playing. 18 months before Wade's little fresh talent speech, I was sitting in my home office at midnight, cold coffee going stale on the desk when I finally cracked the last piece of a problem that had been bothering me for over a year. It wasn't even part of my official job duties. This was one of those ideas that follows you home, interrupts your weekend projects, keeps you awake after everyone else has gone to bed. I'd been analyzing Sterling Manufacturing's supply chain operations, watching the inefficiencies that everyone accepted as just how things work. Redundant processes, unnecessary delays, vendor relationships that cost us money simply because nobody had bothered to optimize them in decades. What I'd been sketching out in my notebook was a completely different approach. Streamlined vendor coordination, predictive inventory management, cross-dock optimization that could cut our logistics costs by 30% without sacrificing delivery reliability. The beauty was in its simplicity. I could explain it to a junior manager in 5 minutes, but it would take competitors years to reverse engineer from scratch. When I finally got the framework working in my test models, I sat back and stared at the results. It was clean, efficient, elegant, like finding a hidden room in a house you'd lived in for decades. I knew exactly what I had. More importantly, I knew it didn't belong to the company. I'd developed every component on my own time, using my own resources, building on knowledge I'd gained through 2 decades of industry experience. It wasn't theirs, it was mine. A week later, I filed a provisional patent application. I didn't tell Wade. I didn't tell anyone. I figured it was better to have legal protection than leave my ideas floating around unprotected. A provisional patent is like planting a flag. You've got 12 months to decide if you want to go all in with a full application. Most people never bother unless they're planning to commercialize something. I wasn't at the time. I just wanted to protect what I'd created. Then Sterling Manufacturing discovered it. I'd mentioned the concept during a casual conversation with another operations manager, thinking it might help with his department's efficiency problems. 3 months later, I started seeing pieces of my methodology showing up in our standard operating procedures. They hadn't stolen my exact framework, just the principles, the optimization strategies, the vendor management techniques I'd developed. It wasn't theft, not technically, but it was close enough that my stomach knotted the first time I saw my ideas implemented without credit. When I brought it up with legal, they waved it off. "Since you haven't filed for independent commercialization, it's not really a concern," one of the lawyers said without looking up from his computer screen. Translation: if it's not making you money somewhere else, it's not worth our time. I walked out of that meeting knowing two things. First, they didn't understand the value of what they were using. Second, they had no idea how much of their improved efficiency was built on my foundation. Over the next year, they wove my methodology into everything: vendor negotiations, inventory planning, even new client proposals that Wade was presenting at industry conferences. It all ran on the framework I'd designed in my home office. They treated it like it was just another component in their operational machine, never stopping to think that maybe the foundation they were standing on didn't actually belong to them. That's when I started keeping detailed records. Every implementation, every process improvement, every client presentation that used my optimization strategies. I wasn't planning revenge yet. It was more like insurance, because someday I might need evidence that I wasn't as replaceable as Wade liked to pretend. What they didn't realize, and what gave me a quiet, almost guilty satisfaction, was that the provisional patent was still active, time-stamped, and legally unassailable. All it needed was the right moment to be converted into a full patent. And when that moment came, I wouldn't just be holding a card they didn't know existed. I'd be holding the card that could take their entire operational advantage off the table. About a month before the Tuesday massacre in Wade's office, I was sitting in a conference room at the back of a law firm downtown, the kind with wood paneling older than my daughter and filing cabinets that looked like they'd survived multiple decades of corporate warfare. Across from me sat Rachel Martinez, an intellectual property attorney I'd worked with years earlier on a licensing issue for my previous employer. Rachel was the kind of lawyer who could read patent language like a cardiologist reads EKGs, and she understood two things better than most attorneys: how to protect an idea and how to bury a legal landmine where nobody expects it. I slid the thick folder across the table. "It's time," I said. She didn't need explanation. The provisional patent I'd filed 15 months earlier was approaching its expiration date, and I wasn't about to let it lapse. We were converting it into a full utility patent: ironclad, comprehensive, untouchable. Rachel flipped through the documentation, her expression focused in the way lawyers get when they're checking every legal angle. "You developed this entirely outside work hours?" she asked without looking up. "Every single component," I said. "My own computer, my own time. The original research files are time-stamped. I've got complete documentation." "Good," she said, and kept reading. We spent the next 3 hours sharpening the language to its most precise edge. Every clause that might give Sterling Manufacturing an opening to claim it was work for hire got replaced with language that made it crystal clear this was independent intellectual property, developed without company resources, fully mine under U.S. patent law. We even included a provision clarifying that any unauthorized use of the methodology by other entities without explicit licensing would constitute patent infringement. The wording wasn't just defensive, it was offensive. If they ever tried to contest it, they'd be walking into a legal meat grinder. By the time Rachel slid the final documents back to me for signature, I could feel something cold and deliberate settling in my chest. "Once this is filed," she said, "there's no walking it back. You'll own it outright. No company claim, no shared rights." She let the sentence hang. The implication was obvious. "If they're already using it," I said, signing my name in ink that seemed to bleed slightly into the paper fibers, "then they're already in violation." We filed that afternoon. No drama, no announcement, just a quiet submission to the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office and an electronic confirmation in my inbox. From that moment on, every time Wade strutted through the facility bragging about operational improvements, I heard the quiet sound of a legal trap clicking into place. Every new efficiency that relied on my framework was another turn of the screw. They thought they were building their competitive advantage. I knew they were deepening their dependence on something they didn't own. I didn't rush it. That's the thing about leverage. You don't waste it on small victories. You wait until the stakes are high enough that when you finally act, the entire structure shakes. That Tuesday termination meeting was my moment. The night Wade fired me, my house was quiet except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the occasional car passing on the wet street outside. My laptop sat open on the kitchen table. The termination packet Wade had given me pushed off to one side like junk mail. I wasn't pacing or rehearsing angry speeches. I'd already processed the meeting and filed it away as completed business. What mattered now was the next move. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I was looking for. Gloria Stevens, VP of Operations at our biggest competitor. someone I'd met years earlier at an industry conference in Chicago. We'd stayed in casual professional contact, usually exchanging observations about supply chain trends or sharing war stories about vendor management disasters. But Gloria was sharp. She had an eye for competitive advantages, and I knew exactly how she'd see this opportunity. I hit call. It rang twice before her voice came through, curious but professional. "Spencer? This is unexpected. What's going on?" "I've got something you're going to want to see," I said. No small talk, no warm-up. A fully granted patent that just happens to cover methodology your biggest competitor has been using for over a year without legal authorization. Silence for a moment, then a slow, interested, "Go on." I explained the background in clean, simple terms. Independent development, clear legal ownership, comprehensive documentation. I didn't need to oversell it. Gloria understood the implications immediately. "Send me the documentation," she said, the casual tone replaced by sharp business focus. I attached the patent filing to an encrypted email while we stayed on the line. A minute later, I could hear her reviewing the documents, the faint sound of papers rustling even though I knew she was reading PDFs. "It's airtight," she said, half to herself. "And they've been implementing this for how long? 15 months minimum. It's integrated into their core operations. Remove it and their efficiency advantage disappears overnight." I could practically hear her smile. "You looking to license this exclusively?" "Exclusively and immediately," I said. From there, it was pure business. We discussed terms in broad strokes, licensing fees, exclusivity periods, non-disclosure requirements. Gloria didn't negotiate much. She recognized value when she saw it, and she knew speed was crucial. Every hour between now and deal closure was another hour Sterling Manufacturing might accidentally discover what was coming. By the time we hung up, it was past midnight. The email chain with Gloria's legal team was already active, timestamps accumulating like poker chips in a winning hand. They were moving fast, faster than I'd hoped. I closed my laptop and leaned back in the chair, staring at the ceiling. I didn't feel vindicated or triumphant. I felt focused, steady, like I'd just moved a piece across the board and knew with absolute certainty that the game was now unwinnable for the other side. Revenge, I'd always believed, wasn't about fireworks or dramatic confrontations. It was about precision, about taking your shot when you were certain it would connect, and not a second sooner. That call to Gloria, that was my shot. And by morning, the first tremors would be working their way through the walls of Wade's corner office. Gloria didn't waste time. By 9 the next morning, her legal team had analyzed every clause, every timestamp, every piece of documentation I'd provided. The conclusion came back exactly as I'd expected. The patent was bulletproof. No gray areas for Sterling Manufacturing to exploit. We connected on a video call. Gloria in her modern office, me at my kitchen table with coffee and a notebook I wasn't actually using. Her first words cut straight to business. "We'll take it. Full exclusivity, complete term, starting today. You'll have your first payment within 48 hours. It was almost anticlimactic in its efficiency. No extended negotiations, no haggling over percentages. They knew this was worth significantly more than I was asking, but they also understood that speed was the real currency here. Every hour between now and public disclosure was a countdown timer for Sterling Manufacturing's competitive position. Within 2 hours, contracts were in my inbox. I read them twice, not because I doubted Gloria's team, but because this was the moment everything shifted from theoretical to irreversible. My digital signature would be the point of no return. I signed electronically, with date and timestamps, and returned the documents without ceremony. Gloria called me 15 minutes later. "Press release goes live this afternoon. We're putting it on the Business Wire at 11:30. I imagined the chain reaction. Some junior analyst in Sterling Manufacturing's communications department spotting the headline, forwarding it to a manager who would then rush it up the corporate ladder until it landed in the CEO's inbox like an active grenade. By the time Wade saw it, the damage would already be spreading. Gloria read me the draft over the phone. Leading manufacturing solutions provider secures exclusive rights to revolutionary supply chain optimization technology. No mention of Sterling Manufacturing by name, none needed. Industry professionals would know exactly who'd just been blindsided, and for those who didn't connect the dots immediately, the next quarterly earnings report would spell it out in painful detail. We coordinated the timing precisely. Their PR team would release the announcement right before the lunch hour, when corporate executives mindlessly scroll headlines between meetings. Just enough time for the news to circulate before markets closed. ensuring a visible impact on Sterling Manufacturing's stock price before day's end. After we hung up, I didn't hover over my computer or check news feeds obsessively. I went about my morning, made another cup of coffee, took out the garbage, watered the plants my wife kept on the kitchen windowsill. The work was finished. All that remained was watching gravity take over. There's a particular clarity that comes in moments like that. It's not triumph or satisfaction. It's knowing you've aligned everything so precisely that once you release control, there's no way to stop the momentum. I'd set the trap 18 months ago. Gloria had just helped me spring it. The press release hit at 11:32 a.m. Sharp. It didn't need dramatic language, just a clean headline that landed like a precision strike. Industrial Solutions. Leader acquires exclusive rights to advanced operational technology. Within minutes, it was everywhere. Trade publications picked it up first, followed by business blogs hungry for corporate drama and mainstream outlets that recognized a good David versus Goliath story. By noon, the headline was spreading through LinkedIn feeds like wildfire. Every share accompanied by speculation. Wonder if Sterling Manufacturing was using this. This could impact their Q4 projections significantly. I didn't need to wonder how it was playing at my former company. I could picture it perfectly. Middle managers checking the news on their phones during lunch breaks, quiet conversations in hallways, Slack channels buzzing with urgent side discussions. The market didn't wait for an internal response. By 1 p.m., Sterling Manufacturing stock had dropped 8% and was still sliding. Not a catastrophic crash, but in corporate terms, it was a bright red emergency flare in the middle of a trading day. Someone in investor relations was already drafting statements full of phrases like business continuity assessment and minimal operational disruption. I sat in my kitchen with fresh coffee, reading the press release for the fourth time. My name wasn't in the headline. It didn't need to be, but it was right there in the body text, exactly where I wanted it. Patent holder Spencer Walsh's exclusive licensing agreement ensures proprietary implementation of the breakthrough methodology. There's a special satisfaction in knowing you don't need to make a single public comment for people to understand the story. Everyone in our industry knew my background. Everyone at Sterling Manufacturing definitely knew who I was. And the fact that I hadn't issued any statements or granted interviews would drive Wade absolutely crazy. He'd be desperate to know what I'd told them, how much I'd been paid, whether I had planned this revenge from the beginning. By late afternoon, the real storm had arrived. My phone stayed quiet, but that didn't mean I wasn't getting updates. An old friend from the accounting department, one of the few people I genuinely trusted there, started sending me messages from ground zero. The first text was just 3 words: Wade is panicking. The second, emergency executive meeting. Whole floor can hear shouting. I could visualize the scene perfectly. The main conference room, blinds drawn, scattered coffee cups growing cold, and the CEO standing at the head of the table with his phone on speaker, his voice carrying through the supposedly soundproof walls. What I don't understand, Wade, my friend texted every word, is how Spencer Walsh's name is on this patent, and how, as of this morning, it's licensed exclusively to our biggest competitor. Apparently there was a pause long enough for everyone to hear papers rustling as Wade tried to gather himself. Then came his response, stammered and defensive. It was internal process documentation. I supervised the... Spencer insisted on adding his name for recognition purposes. The CEO cut him off, voice sharp enough to make everyone in the room flinch. And now every client, every investor, every trade publication thinks you personally handed our competitive advantage to our competition. There it was, the knife twisting exactly where I'd aimed it. Wade's ego, the same trait that made him attach his name to innovations he couldn't explain under oath, had just made him the public face of a corporate disaster. The executives in that room weren't analyzing technical details or patent law. They were looking at Wade. And in corporate environments like theirs, perception becomes reality fast. If your name is associated with the problem, you are the problem. My friend's final message came through a few minutes later. Board demanding answers. Wade looks like he's about to have a heart attack. Security escorted him out an hour ago. The next morning brought no mercy. At 8:15 a.m., Gloria's company released a follow-up statement. Patent documentation confirms exclusive technology transfer. The announcement included, in black and white print, the publicly filed patent record. Right there under inventors was my name, followed by Wade's signature on internal documents acknowledging the methodology's value. By 10 a.m., Sterling Manufacturing stock had dropped another 4%. Wade Griffin was officially pursuing other opportunities, according to the Terse company statement. I spent that morning in my garage organizing tools I'd been meaning to sort for months. Simple, methodical work that kept my hands busy while my mind processed everything that had happened. The small succulent my wife kept on the workbench had put out new growth over the winter, tiny green shoots reaching toward the light. In the right conditions, even the most overlooked things could flourish. So could I. And every time I looked at that plant, I was reminded of something Wade never understood. With patience, proper planning, and the right timing, even the smallest seed can grow into something that changes the entire landscape. The game was over. Wade had finally figured that out. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even, it's getting ahead while they're still figuring out what game you were playing. In corporate America, they'll call you disposable until the day they discover you own something they can't replace.